Informal. So, it's so informal that we didn't even have an intro. This is Charlotte Pierce. I'm the producer of Face the Book TV, and I'm here with Jennia D'Lima, editor, and she's a consulting editor, or what would you call yourself?
I'm a freelance editor, although I do contract with 2 companies.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done a bit of editing with everything, and that goes back to newspapers in high school and college. But now I work with fiction and creative nonfiction.
All right. So do you work as a developmental editor or a line editor, copy editor? Could you just define those different major categories for us?
Yeah, of course. So I'm mostly a developmental and line editor. Developmental means I'm looking at all of the big picture pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at the plot. Does it work? Does it have any plot holes in it that make it unbelievable? And then characters and character arcs. And if we look at literary fiction, that's usually really heavy on theme. And the same thing with creative nonfiction, especially memoir. So then looking at the theme, does that apply throughout? Do we see a satisfactory resolution? That doesn't mean the resolution is happy, but does it make sense within the greater context of the story?
We'll require a happy ending on all stories.
Right. And then line editing is moving more to what it sounds like, a line by line basis. You're looking at the usage of words. And I like to apply this a lot with dialogue also. Does the dialogue sound natural? Does the dialogue not just sound natural, but also to that character? Does it sound like something that character would say given their age, their background, all these other factors and parts of who they are?
Yeah. So that is more line editing or copy editing?
That'd be line editing. And then copy editing really looks at the mechanics of language. So is this word used properly? Do we have the commas in the right place? If you're using idioms and that sort of thing, are you using them properly, or did you misplace a word or use the wrong word?
Yeah. So I was kind of racing here to get my banners in place, but I just wanted to mention that you are one of the speakers at our IPNE, Independent Publishers of New England conference, which is taking place online on November 3rd and 4th. And you're performing a valuable service because
thank you.
Sometimes people, they just want to write and then they just want to get the book out. And it's not that they don't think that, not everybody thinks they don't have to have an editor, but it's just such a gift to have your work edited expertly so that your voice is preserved, but it's like it pops,
Yeah, it's putting out the strongest version of your story and making sure that everything that you wanted to say is going to be coming across to that bigger audience, not just you and the people who are close to you. And therefore, because of that familiarity, it's going to be easier for them to see what you were trying to say.
Yeah,
exactly. But an editor then brings in that outside perspective that's backed up with their knowledge of the genre and the industry.
And how much of a psychologist do you have to be when you're working with an author?
Well, I feel a little odd saying this because I have a master's degree in psychology. So for me, the answer might be different.
You are a psychologist. Ish. Yeah. So, do people get take umbrage at suggestions, or are you pretty good at?
I tend to word things as gently as possible, but I'm aware that this is something that they have really poured their heart and soul into, and it could feel like a personal attack if I'm not very careful about how I word whatever feedback it is that I'm presenting to them.
Yeah. So do you and without giving away your whole presentation for the conference, I want people to register, but do you vet people before, you kind of pretty much know that it's going to be a good project for you to get involved in?
I do have a few onboarding questions that I ask potential clients. And then I also ask to see a sample of the writing. It's hard to do a sample with developmental editing just because you really need to see the whole manuscript to be able to pick out these things like character arcs. But it still gives you an idea of just how much work is going to be put into it and how solid their writing is and even their skill level at getting across certain things. So you might be able to pick up immediately, for instance, that they really understand how to get setting across or emotion in a character.
Yeah. And so getting to the topic that you are going to be focusing on at the conference, editing is a huge field, but identifying your reader, which I think is something that people, I don't know, for some reason they don't always think about that when they're creating a manuscript or, drafting a manuscript. Do you find that to be the case, or?
I do, yes, but I think a lot of it just becomes you have this story in your head and it is pushing to get out. And it's really more just about getting it out on paper and freeing yourself almost in a way, because the story has now been created and is out in the world. And then the audience comes second to that. And that's okay. But we still have to identify who they are, not just for purposes with listing your categories, but enable to, so you can market to them.
I was just going to ask you that. Yeah.
If you don't know who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you going to are you going to go to a fishing conference for a book on baseball, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it helps. It's comps too. So comps are really helpful as well, which again, you have to know who your audience is in order to do that.
You say what is valuable?
Oh, comps. Yeah.
Comps. Yeah.
Comps. Yep.
And by that, you mean not competitive, but comparable, right?
Yes, exactly. So like the book that you just showed, I think we used Age of Adeline for one of the comps. And even though that's a movie, it was still so similar that it still applied. And so we were able to say something about, it had sort of that same magic feel to it, or the same overall, I don't want to say problem. But yeah, so we'll get into that in the conference session as well, about what you can even do to pick your comps, how you can pick your comps, how you should express how those comparisons are similar to your work.
So that's part of your service, or is that like comp title? Would that be a separate?
I tend to just give them if they ask.
Yeah. And before that, you start editing the manuscript.
Yeah, I usually will ask that too when I'm onboarding someone new and they have a manuscript that I haven't seen yet. I'll ask them, well, what would you compare it to? What do you think this is similar to? And I let them know even then it doesn't have to be another book. You can use anything from popular media, because a story is a story.
I realize I did not put our URL in right. But I think you're one of the few that's talking about this topic at the conference. I think it's going to be really helpful for people, it's virtual. Our 12th annual conference and our 4th virtual one, or 3rd or 4th. I don't know. I've been involved with IPNE since about 2008, which is just mind blowing. But we are really hoping that people will sign up for the conference. It's you can do it from the comfort of your living room,
which is perfect.
It's Zoom. It's because we're the 5 or 6 6 New England states. It's a huge geographical area, and we have had in-person conferences in the past, but it's if you have it in Burlington, Vermont, then people in Connecticut aren't going to necessarily, you're going to get some attrition. But we've had really good crowds for this one.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know the folks at the Editorial Arts Academy in Vermont?
I don't think I know anyone specifically. No, I've probably seen names, and if I heard a name, I might say, "Oh yeah, I recognize that."
It's a great concept. They teach people how to be book editors.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty great. Yeah, Susanna Noel. I was on a panel with her a few years ago. Yeah. So, what else do you hope to communicate to people, or what's the biggest? Let's ask you something else. What's the biggest misconception that you feel, or things that you want to clarify to writers and authors?
Well, if we're looking at this just from the session perspective, I would say that choosing your audience isn't as laborious a process as people seem to think it is. It can actually be pretty easy once you narrow it down and figure out how to do it and find some quick tips for being able to do so. If we're looking at it from an editorial perspective, I would say make sure your character has a conflict.
Has a conflict. I love it. But, and is that just for like fiction? Because that's your main.
It works in creative nonfiction too.
Oh.
So, especially with a memoir, you want to see that there's something that becomes an obstacle. And it's sort of like with romance. We know there's a happily ever after. We know it works out. Same thing with the memoir. We know you worked out okay-ish because you're still alive to write this memoir, but we want to know what got in your way to getting there.
That is an interesting thing. I mean, I never really thought of like being mindful of that kind of thing. It's just, but it's true. I mean, you don't want to read just something like, I can remember reading, I was fascinated by Marco Polo and his travels across Asia and stuff. So I read this like diary or something of Marco Polo, and it was boring as hell. It was just like, we came to the town, we entered the town, there were donkeys and, water wells, and, and then it was like the next, there was no like, sweeping battle.
Right. Because when we're looking for a way to pull a reader in, we want them to be curious or intrigued. There has to be something that compels you to keep reading. And everything is like easy. Well, what's the point? We know you're going to get whatever you want. We know nothing's going to stop you. It just feels pointless.
Yeah. Any interesting projects that you're working on right now?
Oh, what can I say? So I'm working on the third in a fantasy series right now in a trilogy. The cast has grown a little bit with every single book. So now we're seeing a lot of these big events that have been playing out in the first two books come to a conclusion here. So that one's been really exciting. Yeah. And it's coming out, I think, either the end of this month or early next month. We're just doing the final little tweaks on it right now.
And do you do all your work yourself, or do you work with other people?
I do all of my work myself. I do have a very part-time PA, but she never sees the manuscripts or does anything involving them. And again, that goes back to confidentiality. And then if someone hires me, they hired me for a reason. It wasn't so I could outsource it.
Yeah, exactly. But, great. Well, that's good to know. I mean, I think
make sure my calendar is up to date for me and that sort of thing. And then
I think we should all be born with a personal assistant. That's my new theory. And a physical therapist, and a regular therapist or a psychological therapist. All right. Well, we are so much looking forward to it, and I'll be one of the moderators. I'm also doing a panel on, what is it called? Leveraging your publisher relationship. So, how authors can, how they can work with publishers to maximize the impact of the book, or the, ease the process and make more books and sell more of them is the theme of our conference.
That's a good theme.
Yeah, exactly. And IPNE.org/events is where you can register. You'll see a bunch of events, including the conference, on that page, and we'll be inundating the airwaves with more announcements and a couple more of these conference previews. But thank you so much for joining us, Jennia.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I look forward to your session. I'm going to have to make sure I have the time to sit down and take it all in. But thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too.